There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the plain clothes of a Tuesday night, or the familiar sound of a friend's laughter, and they offer you a choice that feels small, inconsequential, like picking a movie or deciding on takeout. But the choice is a hinge upon which your entire world will swing. You can't see the weight of it in the moment. You only feel the shift, the subtle groan of the universe reconfiguring itself around you, long after you've answered. For me, that moment arrived dressed as a joke, a silly, careless bet thrown across the space of my living room, a challenge that should have meant nothing. And I, who had spent years building a fortress of careful silence around my heart, chose to swing the door wide open. It started, as so many of our pivotal nights did, on the worn navy blue sofa that had become Julian's unofficial second home. He was sprawled out, all long limbs and restless energy, a half-empty bottle of wine resting precariously on the floor beside him. The television was on, casting flickering blue light across his face, but he wasn't watching it. His gaze was distant, lost somewhere in the architecture of the ceiling. I was on the armchair, nursing my own glass, observing him the way I always did, through the quiet lens of my own affection, a filter that softened his edges and amplified the low hum of melancholy that had clung to him for months. He had this way of occupying a room, not with noise, but with presence, a kind of gravitational pull that bent the space around him, and I, for as long as I'd known him, had been caught helplessly in his orbit. "You're so quiet, Leo," he said suddenly, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. He turned his head, his dark hair falling across his forehead. A small, teasing smile played on his lips, but his eyes held something else, something deeper and more serious. It was a look I was coming to know well, a searching expression that seemed to ask a question he didn't have the words for. Always watching, always thinking. I can practically hear the gears turning in your head. I offered a small shrug, a gesture I'd perfected over the years. It was my shield, my non-committal defense against inquiries that ventured too close to the truth. Someone has to do the thinking for both of us. He laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound filled the quiet corners of the apartment. It was a sound I cataloged, like a rare bird call. "Fair point," he conceded, pushing himself up to a sitting position. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, the playful glint returning to his eyes. "I bet you couldn't do it, though." "Do what?" "Make me blush," he said, the words hanging in the air between us, charged with a strange energy. "I don't think you have it in you. You're too composed, too much of a Zen master." My heart did a slow, painful lurch in my chest. It felt like a trap, a beautiful, terrible, velvet-lined trap. He saw it as a game, a simple test of his unflappable nature against my quiet one. He couldn't know that my entire existence in his presence was a masterclass in suppression. He couldn't know that the thoughts I had about him, the ones I kept locked away behind my teeth, were more than capable of making him blush. They were capable of setting the entire damn room on fire. He was daring a man dying of thirst to describe water. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I could have laughed it off. I could have made a self-deprecating joke and changed the subject. It would have been the safe thing to do, the thing the old Leo, the one who lived in fear of shattering the precious, fragile thing our friendship was, would have done without a second thought. But something had been shifting in me, a slow tectonic grind of patience wearing thin. I was tired of the silence. I was tired of living in the space between what I felt and what I was allowed to say. So I looked at him, really looked at him, and let the fortress crumble just a little. "Is that a bet, Julian?" I asked, and my voice was steadier than I felt. He grinned, a flash of white teeth in the dim light. He had no idea what he was inviting. He couldn't. "Absolutely," he said. "A bottle of that ridiculously expensive whiskey you like says you can't." And in that moment, I made my choice. I set my wine glass down on the coaster beside me with a soft, definitive click. The sound echoed in the sudden stillness of the room. He was still smiling, waiting for a joke, a clever taunt. He was waiting for the game. He didn't realize I wasn't playing. I didn't smile back. He got very quiet then, and the world began to swing. To understand the weight of that silence, You have to understand the foundation it was built on. Julian and I were a study in contrasts, a friendship that should not have worked on paper. We met in college, assigned as random roommates in a cramped dormitory that smelled perpetually of stale pizza and desperation. He was the athlete, the budding software engineer, the guy who moved through the world with an easy, unthinking confidence that drew people to him like moths. His side of the room was a chaotic explosion of life. Hockey gear, textbooks splayed open, clothes that never quite made it into the hamper. He was a creature of motion and sound, his life a running commentary spoken at full volume. I, on the other hand, was a ghost. I was studying photography, a discipline of stillness and observation. My side of the room was a testament to quiet order. Books stacked by size, camera lenses cleaned and capped, prints of stark landscapes, and intimate portraits pinned neatly to a corkboard. I spoke when spoken to, and I had perfected the art of making myself small, of blending into the background. My whole life was about framing the world, not being in the center of it. I watched life, Julian lived it. For the first month, we barely interacted beyond the requisite grunts of acknowledgement in the morning. He was a whirlwind of social activity, and I was a shadow he passed on his way in and out. I was convinced he barely registered my existence. Then came the night of the midterms. I was pulling an all-nighter, hunched over a developing tray in the campus darkroom, coaxing an image from a blank sheet of paper. The chemical smell, the deep red safe light, the meditative slosh of the fixer, it was my sanctuary. I lost all track of time until the custodian gently informed me the building was closing. I stumbled back to the dorm, exhausted and reeking of acetic acid, to find Julian awake, staring at a mountain of code on his laptop with a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He looked up as I came in, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "I can't do this," he whispered, the words raw with defeat. His usual bravado was completely gone, stripped away by stress and caffeine. "It's a complete mess. I'm going to fail." I wasn't good at comfort. I didn't know the words people were supposed to say, so I did the only thing I could think of. I walked to the tiny kitchenette, filled the electric kettle, and made 2 mugs of strong tea. I set one down on his desk without a word and sat on my own bed, sipping mine. We sat like that for a long time, in the shared, humming silence of late-night desperation. Eventually, he started talking, not to me, really, but to the room. He talked through the logic of the code, the places where it broke, the elegant solution that was just out of his reach. I just listened. I didn't understand the jargon, but I understood the cadence of frustration, the shape of a problem that felt too big to solve alone. Hours later, as the first gray hint of dawn touched the window, he finally cracked it. He let out a loud whoop of victory, startling me. He spun around in his chair, a grin of pure, exhausted relief splitting his face. "Leo," he said, his voice full of wonder, as if seeing me for the first time. "You're a genius." I hadn't said a word. But from that night on, something changed. He had seen me. He had discovered that my silence wasn't empty. It was a space he could fill. And he began to fill it, with stories of his classes, his hockey games, his complicated relationship with a girl from his hometown named Sarah. I became his sounding board, his quiet confessor. And I, in turn, began to fall in love with him. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a slow, imperceptible slide. It was in the way he'd throw a clean shirt at me when he was done with his laundry, still warm from the dryer. It was in the concentrated frown he wore when he was trying to fix something, his tongue caught between his teeth. It was in the easy way he would flop onto my bed to talk, leaving the scent of his shampoo on my pillow. Each small, meaningless gesture was a grain of sand, and over the years, they built a desert of yearning inside me that I had to learn to navigate alone. I became an expert at hiding it. My photography was my outlet and my shield. I could aim my lens at him, capturing the candid, unposed moments of his life, and call it art. I had a whole box of prints hidden under my bed, a secret history of my affection. Julian laughing so hard that tears streamed down his face. Julian asleep on the couch, his hand dangling to the floor. Julian staring out the window on a rainy afternoon, a pensive look on his face that no one else ever seemed to notice. I was documenting a life I desperately wanted to be a part of, not just an observer of. I told myself it was enough. Friendship was a solid, dependable structure. It was a house I could live in. Love was a lightning strike, a fire, something that could burn that house to the ground. So I stayed inside, safe and quiet and desperately lonely. Years passed. We graduated, got an apartment together because it was easy and familiar. He continued his trajectory, landing a great job as a consultant that had him traveling constantly. His relationship with Sarah became a long-distance saga of dramatic breakups and emotional reconciliations. I started getting freelance work, small commissions, enough to get by. I built a life in the quiet spaces Julian left behind when he was away, and braced myself for the whirlwind of his return. I was his anchor, his constant, the one solid thing in his turbulent life. "I don't know what I'd do without you, man," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder after a particularly bad fight with Sarah, and the casual affection of it was both a balm and a knife. He saw me as a brother, a rock, a piece of furniture in the architecture of his life. He had no idea that the rock had a heartbeat. The final shift, the one that set the stage for the bet, came 6 months before that night on the couch. It was a Tuesday. Julian called me from a hotel in Chicago. His voice was hollow, broken in a way I'd never heard before. "She ended it," he said, with no preamble. For good this time. It was different from all the other times. There was a finality in his tone that chilled me. Sarah, the great constant of his romantic life, the narrative thread that had run parallel to our friendship for nearly a decade, was gone. The story was over. And when Julian returned from that trip, he was a different person. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, haunted emptiness. The sun had gone out. He was adrift in a way I'd never seen, and he clung to me, to our shared apartment, like a man swept out to sea clinging to a piece of wreckage. He couldn't stand to be alone. The silence of his own room, a space once shared with Sarah during her visits, a room full of ghosts, became unbearable to him. The first night he was back, I found him in the living room at 3 a.m, just sitting in the dark. He didn't say anything when I came out. He just looked at me with those lost, hollow eyes. I didn't ask. I just made a space for him on the couch, threw a blanket over him, and went back to bed, leaving my own bedroom door slightly ajar. It was a silent invitation, a signal that he wasn't completely alone in the house. A few nights later, the pretense of the couch dissolved. I woke to the soft creak of my door opening wider. In the dim light filtering in from the street, I saw his silhouette hesitating in the doorway. He looked like a ghost. He stood there for a full minute, a statue of indecision, before he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper, thin and frayed. "Leo?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Yeah. Can I?" He trailed off, the question hanging unfinished in the space between us. He didn't need to finish it. I knew what he was asking. He was asking for sanctuary. He was asking to not be alone. Every instinct for self-preservation I possessed screamed at me to say no, to protect the fragile peace of my own heart, to keep this one space, my bed, sacred and mine alone. But looking at his slumped shoulders, at the profound loneliness radiating from him, I couldn't do it. The part of me that loved him won out over the part of me that was terrified of him. "Yeah," I whispered back into the darkness. "Come on." He moved across the room and slid into the other side of my queen-sized bed. The mattress dipped with his weight, a sudden, shocking reality. He lay on his back, stiff as a board, a careful foot of space between us, a chasm of unspoken rules and anxieties. The air was thick with it. I could feel the heat coming off his body, smell the faint, familiar scent of his soap. I lay there, rigid, listening to the sound of his breathing, every nerve in my body screamingly aware of his proximity. This was a new territory, a dangerous and uncharted landscape. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one who felt adrift. Thus began the ritual. It was never spoken of in the light of day. In the morning, he would be gone before I was fully awake, or we would move around each other in the kitchen with a studied, careful casualness, making coffee and talking about work as if nothing had happened. But every night, after the lights were out, the soft creak of my door would announce his arrival. He was seeking refuge from his own ghosts, and my bed had become his sanctuary. The ritual was a fragile, unspoken agreement, a thing that existed only in the dark. Slowly, over weeks, the chasm between us began to shrink. The initial rigidity softened. It started with an accidental brush of hands as we both shifted, a jolt of electricity that I felt all the way to my bones. He never pulled away. Then came a night when he was thrashing in his sleep, caught in a nightmare, his breathing ragged. On pure instinct, I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. He stilled instantly, sinking back into a peaceful sleep with a soft sigh. I left my hand there for a long time, feeling the warmth of his skin through his t-shirt, the steady rise and fall of his chest. It felt like holding something impossibly precious and fragile. The ritual evolved. He started turning onto his side, facing me in his sleep. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night to find his arm thrown across my waist, his face buried in the pillow next to mine. My room, my bed, my own personal space had become a shared territory. The line between friend and something else had been blurred into non-existence, smudged away by exhaustion and grief and a desperate, unspoken need for comfort. For him, I told myself, it was about solace. It was a purely platonic act of desperation, a way to fend off the loneliness that was eating him alive. He was using me as a human sedative, a warm body to prove he wasn't alone in the universe. He was the unknowing initiator, pushing boundaries he didn't even seem to see. But for me, it was a slow and exquisite form of torture. Every night was a battle between the overwhelming desire to close the remaining distance, to wrap my arms around him and hold him properly, and the paralyzing fear of shattering the fragile illusion we had built. I would lie awake for hours, my body humming with a painful awareness, cataloging every detail. The way his eyelashes feathered against his cheeks, the soft puff of his breath against my neck, the solid, grounding weight of him beside me. It was intimacy without context, affection without a name. It was heaven and it was hell, all at once. My camera became my only confidant. I couldn't photograph him in my bed. That was a line even I wouldn't cross, a secret too sacred to capture, but my other work became saturated with the feeling of it. My portraits became more intense, my landscapes more lonely. I was trying to develop a picture of my own heart, to understand the shape of this thing that was growing between us in the dark. I lived a double life, the calm, supportive friend during the day, and the silent, yearning lover at night. The tension was stretching me thin, pulling me apart. I felt like a photograph submerged in the developer for too long, the image threatening to overexpose, to turn completely black. I knew something had to give. I just never imagined he would be the one to hand me the scissors. Which brings us back to the couch and the bet. When he laid down that challenge, I bet you couldn't make me blush. It felt like the universe was presenting me with an invoice. For all the nights of stolen, ambiguous closeness. For all the unspoken words. For all the hope I had secretly hoarded in the dark. The price of my silence was the truth. And suddenly, I was willing to pay it. I stood up from the armchair and walked over to the sofa. I didn't sit. I knelt on the floor in front of him, so that we were at eye level. The movement was deliberate, ceremonial. It shifted the power dynamic of the room entirely. His playful smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, of apprehension. The air crackled. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen suddenly sounded deafening. He wasn't smiling anymore. "You think it's about a joke?" I began, my voice low, softer than I intended, but it carried in the stillness. "You think I'd have to tell some crude story or pay you some over-the-top compliment to win? That's not it. That's not my language." I held his gaze. His eyes were wide now, dark pools reflecting the faint blue light of the television. He was completely still, a statue carved from attention. He was listening, truly listening. "Blushing isn't about embarrassment," I continued, the words feeling like they were being pulled from some deep, hidden well inside of me. "It's about being seen. Suddenly and unexpectedly. It's the body's involuntary confession that the soul has been touched. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his breath held. You want to know how I'd make you blush, Julian? I kept my voice even, a quiet current in a silent room. I wouldn't tell you you're handsome, even though you are. You've heard that your whole life. It's meaningless. White noise. I would tell you about the tiny, almost invisible scar just above your left eyebrow, the one you got when you were 7 and fell out of a tree. I know you hate it, but I like it. It breaks the perfect symmetry of your face, and it makes you real. I saw the first hint of color rise in his cheeks, a faint pink that started at his neck. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. I tell you that I know you think you're a mess when you're working through a problem, but I see the opposite. I see this incredible, focused intensity. You get this little crease between your brows, and you chew on your lower lip, and the rest of the world just ceases to exist for you. It's the most brilliant thing to watch. It's like watching someone solve the universe. The pink deepened, spreading up his cheeks now, a slow, beautiful tide. He broke eye contact, his gaze dropping to my hands, which were resting on my knees. His own hands were clenched into loose fists on the sofa cushions. I would talk about your laugh, I said, my own voice getting a little thick. Not the loud one you use in a crowd. The real one. The one that happens when you're completely caught off guard. When something is so funny you can't breathe. It starts in your chest, this deep, rumbling thing, and your eyes crinkle up at the corners so much you can't see, and you throw your head back. That sound could cure diseases, I swear. He was looking at me again now, and his eyes were glistening. The blush was a dark, fiery red, a stark contrast to the paleness of his skin. He was utterly, completely seen. The walls he'd built around himself, the persona of the easygoing, confident guy, had been dismantled, brick by brick, with quiet, devastating truths. I leaned in a little closer, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. This was the final blow. This was the kill shot. And if I really wanted to win the bet, I whispered, I would tell you that for the last 3 months, I have laid awake every single night, listening to you breathe beside me. And I would tell you that the single greatest act of courage I perform every day is not wrapping my arms around you and begging you to stay in the morning. I would tell you that I am so profoundly in love with you that the silence in this apartment is screaming with it. And the fact that you can't hear it is the only thing that lets me survive. I finished. The words hung in the air, shimmering, terrible, and true. He was crimson, a deep, painful, beautiful blush that covered his entire face, his neck, even the tips of his ears. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, and there were tears welling in his eyes, blurring the edges of my vision. The game was over. The bet was won. But it wasn't about the whiskey anymore. It was about the wreckage my confession had just made of our carefully constructed friendship. He didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. The silence stretched and thinned until it was a wire, humming with tension. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. I had done it. I had detonated the bomb I'd been carrying for years, and now we were both just sitting in the fallout, waiting to see what was left standing. I had gambled everything on the slim, insane hope that he might feel even a fraction of what I felt. And in his shocked, blushing silence, I felt the sickening certainty that I had lost. Then he moved. It was a small, hesitant motion. He slowly, so slowly, lifted a hand. I flinched internally, bracing myself for a push, for a gesture of rejection. But his hand didn't push me away. It came to rest on the side of my face, his thumb stroking gently over my cheekbone. His touch was a question. It was tentative, shaking slightly, but it was there. It was real. His eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw a storm of emotions I couldn't begin to name. Shock, fear, confusion, and something else. Something fragile and hopeful and terrified. His voice, when he finally found it, was a rasp, a broken whisper. Leo, he breathed. And then, another long, agonizing pause, as if he was translating a foreign language in his head. Would it be, he started, his voice cracking. He swallowed hard and tried again. Would it be okay if I kissed you? The world stopped. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. Of all the possible outcomes I had braced myself for, rejection, anger, awkward laughter, pity, this was the one that had never even entered the realm of possibility. It was a script from a dream I wouldn't have dared to have. The question was so full of a vulnerability that mirrored my own, it undid me. He wasn't the confident initiator now. He was asking for permission. He was meeting me on my own territory, the land of quiet consent. I couldn't find my voice. I could only nod, a small, jerky movement. It was all the answer he needed. He leaned forward, closing the last few inches between us. The kiss wasn't passionate or demanding. It was soft. It was hesitant. It was a question, a confession, and an apology all at once. It was just the gentle pressure of his lips against mine, a moment of impossible stillness. It tasted of wine and salt. The salt of his tears, or maybe mine, I couldn't tell. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was long enough to rewrite our entire history. It was the period at the end of a long, unspoken sentence. The photograph finally developed. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. His eyes were closed. The blush had receded, leaving him pale and shaken. "You win the bet," he whispered, and it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a surrender. The morning after was a study in absence. I woke up alone. The other side of my bed was cold, the sheets unervingly smooth. For a delirious moment, I thought I might have dreamed it all. The bet, the confession, the impossible, world-altering kiss. But then I saw it. A piece of paper folded neatly on his pillow. My stomach plummeted. Notes were for endings. Notes were for goodbyes. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. The message was short, the handwriting a frantic scrawl so unlike his usual confident script. "I need some air. Had to think. Talk later. Talk later." The two most terrifying words in the English language. They were a door slamming shut, a conversation postponed indefinitely. He was gone. He had fled. The sanctuary we had built in the dark had been exposed to the light of day, and he had run from it. The hope that had bloomed so violently in my chest the night before withered and died, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. I had misinterpreted everything. The kiss wasn't a beginning. It was a moment of confused pity, a fleeting impulse he now regretted. I had taken his grief and his loneliness and twisted them into something they were never meant to be. I had not only broken our friendship, I had desecrated it. I felt like a fool, a naive, pathetic fool. The apartment was suffocatingly quiet. The silence was different now. It was no longer the comfortable, lived-in silence of our shared history. It was a hollow, echoing void, filled with the ghosts of everything I had said and everything he hadn't. Every object in the living room seemed to mock me. The sofa where he'd made the bet. The wine glasses still sitting on the coffee table. The whole room was a crime scene, and my heart was the victim. I spent the day in a numb haze, moving from room to room like a phantom in my own home, my cameras sitting untouched on their shelves. What was the point of observing the world when my own world had just collapsed? He didn't come home that night. The soft creak of my bedroom door never came. The empty space in my bed was a physical ache, a cold expanse that felt wider than an ocean. I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, replaying my confession over and over in my head. The words that had felt so brave and true now just sounded selfish and reckless. I had forced him into a corner, burdened him with an affection he never asked for and clearly didn't want. The silence from him was his answer, and it was a resounding, definitive no. A day turned into 2, then 3. He communicated only through terse, impersonal text messages. Working late, grabbing dinner with a client, staying at a hotel downtown. Project is intense. They were flimsy, transparent excuses. He was avoiding me. He was hiding. The anger began to curdle the grief inside me. It was a slow, hot burn. Anger at him for his cowardice, for kissing me, and then vanishing as if I were a shameful secret. But mostly, anger at myself for allowing myself to hope. By the 5th day, I couldn't take it anymore. The ambiguity was more painful than a clean rejection would have been. I needed to know. I needed to hear the words, no matter how much they would hurt. I needed him to look me in the eye and end it, so I could begin the long, arduous process of sweeping up the pieces of my own heart. I sent him a text message that was the complete opposite of his own. It was simple, direct, and left no room for evasion. We need to talk. Tonight. I'll be home. I didn't know if he would show up. I spent hours pacing the apartment, my anxiety a live thing in my gut. I cleaned obsessively, rearranging books, wiping down counters, trying to impose some kind of order on the chaos I was feeling. Every car that passed on the street below made me jump. Finally, around 9 o'clock, I heard a key in the lock. The sound was so foreign now, so jarring. The door opened, and he stepped inside. He looked awful. He was pale, his eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with exhaustion, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He stood in the doorway, clutching the strap of his messenger bag like a lifeline, not quite entering, not quite leaving. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Hey," he said to the floor. I stood by the kitchen counter, my arms crossed over my chest. It was a defensive posture, a way to hold myself together. "Hey," I replied, my voice flat. "Thanks for coming." The sarcasm was subtle, but he caught it. He winced. "Leo, he sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. He finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't pity or disgust. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. "I'm so sorry. I'm such an idiot." "Which part are you sorry for, Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "The part where you kissed me? Or the part where you ran away like a coward and hid for 5 days?" "Both," he whispered, his voice cracking. "All of it. I didn't know what to do. So you did nothing." I shot back, the hurt finally spilling over. "You left a note. You hid behind text messages. Do you have any idea what that felt like? After what I told you? After what you did?" "I know," he said, taking a hesitant step into the apartment and letting the door click shut behind him. The sound was like a gavel falling. "I know it was cruel. I was freaking out, Leo. My whole world just tilted. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about us, it just shattered." He dropped his bag to the floor and ran a hand through his already messy hair. He looked completely lost. "After Sarah, I was so lost. And being here, with you, it was the only thing that felt safe. It was the only place I could breathe. And I told myself it was just because you were my best friend. I told myself the cuddling, all of it, it was just comfort. It was platonic. It had to be." He paced the small space of the entryway, his movements agitated, restless. "Because I'm not. I'm the guy who dated Sarah for 10 years. I'm the hockey player. I'm straight. That's the story. That's who I am. Or who I thought I was." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. "And then you said all those things. You didn't just see me, Leo. It felt like you reached into my chest and showed me my own heart. And it was terrifying. And then I kissed you, and it wasn't a mistake. That's what scared me the most. It felt right. It felt more right than anything has in a very long time. It felt like coming home." He choked on the last words, his composure finally breaking. A single tear tracked its way down his cheek. And I didn't know how to be the guy who felt that. I didn't know who that person was. So I ran. I ran from you, and I ran from myself. And it has been the most miserable 5 days of my entire life. Being alone out there was 100 times lonelier than any night I ever spent after Sarah left. Because it wasn't just silence. It was your absence. All the anger drained out of me, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He wasn't a coward. He was just a man whose map of the world had suddenly been revealed to be wrong, and he was lost, trying to find his way in a new and unfamiliar landscape. He wasn't running from me. He was running from the truth, a truth that implicated them both. I uncrossed my arms and walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. I didn't touch him yet. "You're not an idiot, Julian," I said softly. "You're just human. And you're scared. I get it. I've been scared for 10 years. His head snapped up, his eyes wide. 10 years. I gave him a small, sad smile. "You're a brilliant guy, but sometimes you can be remarkably unobservant." A shaky laugh escaped him, half sob, half laugh. "Yeah," he said, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I guess I am." The tension in the room had finally broken. It was replaced by something fragile, but real. The truth was out. All of it. We were no longer hiding, from ourselves or from each other. We were just two people, standing in the ruins of what we were, trying to figure out what we could build in its place. "So what now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" "I don't know," I admitted, and the honesty was a relief. "I guess we stop running. We stay, and we figure it out. Together." I closed the small distance between us, and, for the first time, I was the one who initiated. I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but they curled around mine instantly, holding on tight. It wasn't a gesture of comfort for a grieving friend. It wasn't an accident in the dark. It was a choice. A deliberate, hopeful, terrifying choice. We didn't talk much more that night. The words were exhausted. We stood there for a long time, just holding hands in the middle of our living room. The silence no longer a void, but a space for healing. Later, when we finally moved towards the bedroom, it was together. There was no hesitation, no unspoken ritual. When he slid into bed beside me, he didn't stay on his side. He turned and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest and holding me like he was afraid I might disappear. I buried my face in his shirt, breathing in the scent of him, the scent of home, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely and utterly safe. The door to my bedroom, which for months had been left symbolically ajar, a passage for plausible deniability, an escape route. I reached out and pushed it gently closed. The soft click echoed in the quiet room. It was the sound of an ending and the sound of a beginning. The days that followed were a process of gentle rediscovery. We were learning a new language, a new way of being with each other. The grand, dramatic confession gave way to a series of quiet, domestic revelations. It was in the way he started leaving his toothbrush next to mine, a small, permanent fixture. It was in the way I'd find him looking at the portraits I'd taken of him over the years, the ones I'd finally brought out from their hiding place, a soft, wondering smile on his face. He was seeing the history of my love for him, and instead of fear, I saw acceptance in his eyes. The architecture of our relationship was being rebuilt, not on the old, rickety foundation of secrets and unspoken rules, but on a new, solid ground of honesty. The nightly ritual was transformed. There was no longer a ghost haunting the doorway. He came to bed with me, his presence a given, a comfort that was now claimed and returned. The accidental touches were replaced by intentional ones. A hand on the small of my back as we passed in the kitchen, fingers laced together as we watched a movie on the couch, a soft kiss to my forehead before we fell asleep. These were the small, sturdy bricks of our new life. One Saturday morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. I found him in the kitchen, bathed in the soft morning light, wearing one of my old t-shirts. He was focused on making pancakes, a crease of concentration between his brows. He looked peaceful. He looked happy. He looked like he belonged there. I picked up my camera from the counter, the one that had felt too heavy to hold just a week before, and framed him in the viewfinder. He looked up just as I pressed the shutter, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was his real smile, the one that crinkled his eyes at the corners. The click of the camera was no longer the sound of a secret being kept, but of a memory being cherished. "You're staring," he said, his voice warm. "I'm observing," I corrected him gently. "There's a difference." He laughed that deep, rumbling laugh, and the sound filled our kitchen, our home. He brought a plate of slightly misshapen pancakes to the table and sat down across from me. There were no more bets to be won, no more truths to be forced. Everything was quiet now. It was the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. There are moments that change you, not with a loud explosion, but with a quiet click, like a door closing on one life and opening onto another. You realize that a home is not a place, but a presence. It's the safety you feel in another person's orbit, the profound peace of being truly seen. The greatest risks are not the ones that lead to failure, but the ones you never take. Julian and I had spent years living in separate rooms, divided by a wall of fear and silence. But by daring to speak the truth, by risking everything, we had finally finally knocked it down. And in the space that remained, we began to build our life.